And Cathy Lynn Taylor, Republican strategist, former advisor to President George W. Bush. Cathy, good to see you.
Thanks.
Jeb Bush has lost almost half of his support in New Hampshire since July. Pretty much same thing in Iowa. What in the world's going on with Jeb Bush? Is this of his own doing, or is he sort of a victim of Trump?
You know, I think that it's really both. But the reality is that Jeb has the wrong strategy, and it needs to change. Americans are looking for a leader for whom they can look up to, but also to whom they can relate. And he's not doing that, and the polls are showing it. And why his campaign is not taking a massive turnaround is unclear. He needs a moment of leadership.
Let's talk about Scott Walker. He has lost stunningly 3/4 of his support in New Hampshire. In Iowa, he was leading with 21% in April. Now it's a scant 6%. That's the Real Clear Politics poll average. Talk about implosion. Wow, his name is synonymous with Scott Walker.
Right. And I mean, this is becoming a campaign of outsiders. And those who are insiders are not faring well. Folks are looking for real change. We've seen the Quinnipiac poll showing that, the 71% dissatisfaction. And folks are really looking to candidates like Trump and Fiorina and Carson's to make some real change, both in Washington and outside. And folks like Walker are going to have a tough time.
Glad you brought up Ben Carson, Dr. Ben Carson. He has moved up tremendously in Iowa over the last 6 weeks. He's gone from 7% to roughly 20%, just a few points behind Trump. And in fact, he's tied with Trump in the Monmouth poll. How do you handicap Ben Carson?
I think it's very difficult. You know, it's so interesting. On Friday, Donald Trump said, I hope Ben takes a shot at me. I have a good counterpunch. But he's the only person, Ben Carson, that Trump hasn't aggressively gone after. And I think it says an awful lot. And what's so notable is that Ben Carson has small donors making up 65% of his contribution, when President Obama won with 33%. It's a really astounding campaign he's managing so far.
You know, the criticism of Trump has been that he alienates more people than he attracts. And in fact, for the longest time, his negatives were way higher than his positive. That has changed. His net favorability has soared 16% in just the last 2 weeks, according to Gallup. How do you figure?
It's astounding. But, you know, other than, and forgive the comparison, but I think other than Madonna, I don't know a marketer in the 21st century who has been as ingenious about promoting themselves as Donald Trump. And he's very, very sage at this. And so I think that he has tapped into something with voters that we know about. But even more importantly than tapping into the anger, he's tapped into fearlessness. He has changed the conversation of electoral politics to really bring up conversations that hadn't been had in the past. And I think that that's benefiting folks like Fiorina and Carson's, but it's also really an important moment in history that he's really instigated.
Yeah, but the great unknown is whether Trump, the showman, will begin to wear a bit thin on audiences. And people may begin to wonder, as John Funn did in the National Review, he wrote, whether there's anything behind the bombast is what people may begin to focus on.
It's an excellent point you make, Greg, and I think that the truth remains to be seen. But the reality is that conservatives, and particularly the Tea Party folks, are going to have a difficult decision to make. Yeah. Are they looking for change for the sake of change, or are they looking for change according to conservative principles? And if it's the latter, I think Donald Trump's going to have a difficult road ahead.
Well, and his highest level of support comes from people least likely to vote. That's the other unknown factor. All right. Cathy Lynn Taylor, good to see you, Cathy.